Elena Martinez had never believed in luck. Growing up as the daughter of a struggling single mother in the outskirts of the city, she learned early that the world only rewarded those who fought with everything they had. While her classmates carried designer handbags and spoke casually about weekend trips to Paris or Milan, she worked part-time shifts at the cafe down the street, pouring coffee for people who barely glanced at her as they ordered. Yet Elena carried herself with a quiet dignity, her dark hair always tied neatly, her almond eyes glowing with determination. She believed life would change, not because of fate, but because she would make a change. What she did not expect was for her path to collide with a man like Rowan Blackwood. He wasn't just any man. He was the heir to the Blackwood empire, a conglomerate worth billions, a family whispered about in the business world with both envy and fear. Rowan wasn't the kind of billionaire who paraded his wealth. Instead, he wore it like an invisible crown, commanding attention the moment he stepped into a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to strip away pretense, he was used to people bending around him, afraid to say no, afraid to get too close. He lived in a fortress of wealth and power, and though surrounded by admirers, he trusted no one. Elena first saw him one rainy afternoon at the cafe. She had just finished wiping down the counter when the door opened, the bell chiming softly. A man walked in, shaking rain from his tailored coat. There was an aura around him, as though the storm outside had followed him in. Customers whispered, some instantly recognizing him, others simply sensing the weight of his presence. Elena didn't recognize his face at first. She didn't keep up with tabloids or financial magazines, but she noticed the way his eyes scanned the room, cold and calculating, before landing on her. For the briefest moment, something in those eyes softened, as though she reminded him of something long buried. "What will it be?" Elena asked, keeping her voice steady. She had dealt with difficult customers before, entitled, arrogant, and dismissive. She braced herself for another one. "Black coffee," he replied simply, his voice deep and smooth. No hesitation, no smile. She nodded, preparing his order without further comment. Most women would have used the opportunity to flirt, to catch the attention of a man who clearly oozed wealth and power. But Elena had no interest in playing games. She served him the coffee and moved on to the next customer. That was the moment Rowan noticed her. Not because she was the most beautiful woman in the room, though she had an understated beauty that drew the eye, but because she didn't try to impress him. She treated him like a regular man, something he hadn't experienced in years. Days turned into weeks, and Rowan returned to the cafe more often than coincidence could explain. At first, Elena assumed he simply liked the coffee. But when she caught him watching her, studying the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she smiled faintly when she thought no one was looking, she realized his visits weren't about caffeine. Still, she kept her distance. He was a customer, and she had no time to get distracted by a man who wore wealth like armor. One evening, the cafe was closing when she heard a commotion outside. Two men in suits were arguing with a homeless man who had taken shelter by the doorway. Elena rushed out, ready to defend the old man, but before she could, Rowan appeared. His car, a sleek black Bentley, was parked at the curb, and he stood there with a quiet authority that silenced the argument instantly. He pulled out his wallet, handed the homeless man a stack of bills, and told the suited men to leave him be. His tone was sharp, brooking no argument. The old man stumbled away with tears in his eyes, whispering blessings under his breath. Elena was stunned. She had assumed Rowan was just another cold billionaire, but in that moment, she glimpsed a hidden side to him, one he clearly tried to keep buried. "Why did you do that?" she asked before she could stop herself. He turned to her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Because I could." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was enough to stir something inside her. Beneath his armor, she sensed loneliness, pain. A man who had everything yet carried himself like he had nothing. Their connection deepened, though neither admitted it. Rowan began leaving extravagant tips, though Elena always tried to return them. One night, after she refused yet again, he asked, "Why won't you take what's freely given?" "Because I don't need charity," she said firmly. I need to earn everything I get. Her words hit him harder than she knew. Rowan had grown up in a world where money bought loyalty, affection, even love. But here was a woman who refused his wealth, who looked him in the eye without fear. For the first time in years, he felt seen. What Elena didn't know was that Rowan had secrets tied to her past. She didn't know that her father, a man she barely remembered, once stood in the shadow of the Blackwood Empire. Nor did she know that Rowan's sudden interest in her wasn't just about attraction. He had come to the cafe that day for a reason. The truth was, Rowan had been searching for her. But fate is cruel in the way it weaves romance with danger. Just as their lives began to entwine, betrayal was waiting in the wings. Someone in Rowan's world wanted him destroyed, and Elena, innocent, unprepared, was about to be dragged into the storm. That night, after closing the cafe, Elena found herself walking home under the dim streetlights. She heard footsteps behind her, quickening when she did. Fear prickled her skin, and she turned sharply, only to see Rowan emerge from the shadows. Relief washed through her, quickly followed by irritation. "Are you following me now?" she demanded. "Making sure you get home safe," he said casually, though his eyes flickered toward the alley behind them, scanning for danger. Elena didn't know it yet, but her life had just become a game of power, passion, and peril, where her heart and his fortune would be tested in ways neither could have imagined. Elena woke the next morning still unsettled from the strange way her night had ended. Rowan's sudden appearance in the shadows had left her with more questions than answers. Why would a man of his status bother escorting a cafe worker home, let alone lurk in the dark streets as though he were guarding her? She pushed the thoughts aside as she tied her apron and prepared for another long shift. Work was the only anchor she had, and she refused to let her mind wander into the realm of fantasies. But Rowan was not a man easily ignored. He returned that day, and the day after, always at the same table by the window. His presence unsettled not only Elena, but also the other employees, who whispered about him in hushed voices, speculating on why a billionaire would haunt their little cafe. The customers, too, took notice. Women lingered longer, adjusting their hair and makeup in the reflection of their phone screens whenever he looked up, though he rarely spared them a glance. His eyes were always on Elena. That week, Elena's manager pulled her aside. "Do you know him?" she asked, her tone suspicious. "No," Elena replied quickly, though her heart betrayed her with its unsteady beat. "Then be careful. Men like that don't come without reasons." Elena nodded, though she hated how her manager's words echoed the unease already growing inside her. She tried to convince herself it was coincidence, but deep down she knew better. One rainy evening, the cafe was nearly empty when Rowan finally broke his silence. He waited until she approached with a check before speaking. "You shouldn't have to work this hard." Elena blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me, you deserve more than this," he said, his gaze steady, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. "A woman like you shouldn't spend her nights cleaning tables for people who don't even look at her face." Anger flared inside her. "And what would you know about my life? You think money is the only measure of worth." Most men in Rowan's world would have been offended by her tone, but instead he looked almost intrigued. "I know money can't buy what matters," he admitted, his voice low, almost bitter. Elena didn't know how to respond. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as his words lingered between them. He was a man carved from ice, yet for a fleeting second, she felt warmth. It was Rowan who broke the silence. "Dinner with me. Tomorrow night." It wasn't a question. It was a command, the kind he gave in boardrooms and courts of power. But Elena was not one of his employees. "No," she said firmly, surprising herself as much as him. For a heartbeat, his gray eyes widened, as though no one had ever denied him before. Then a slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "You'll change your mind." And she did. Not because she wanted to, but because fate forced her hand. The next evening, as she left work, she found her mother waiting outside the cafe. She was pale, clutching a stack of bills with trembling hands. "Elena," her mother whispered, "the landlord is threatening us again. If we don't pay by the end of the week, we'll lose the apartment." Panic rushed through her veins. She had been saving, but the money wasn't nearly enough. She worked double shifts, cut her own meals in half, yet still they were behind. And now, staring at her mother's desperate eyes, Elena felt the walls closing in. That was when the sleek Bentley pulled up at the curb. The tinted window lowered, and Rowan's face appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence was enough, an unspoken promise of power, of rescue, of everything she had convinced herself she didn't need. Her mother gasped, clutching her arm. "Isn't that?" "Yes," Elena said quickly, cutting her off. She didn't want her mother to know, didn't want to admit what was happening. But when Rowan opened the door and said softly, "Get in," she found herself obeying. The restaurant he took her to was unlike anything she had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. The scent of roses filled the air, and every waiter seemed to bow a little lower in his presence. Elena felt out of place in her simple dress, though Rowan's eyes followed her with such intensity that she wondered if he even noticed the glittering women at the other tables. "You look perfect," he said, reading her unease. The words startled her more than the lavish setting. Perfect. No one had ever called her that before. But just as her walls began to lower, she caught the flicker of movement across the room. A man in a dark suit watched them, his gaze sharp and dangerous. Rowan's eyes narrowed when he noticed, and for the briefest moment, Elena saw something cold and violent flash across his face. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You need to trust me," he murmured, his grip firm. She wanted to ask why, wanted to demand answers about the man watching them, but something in his tone silenced her. She nodded, even though her heart thundered with confusion. As the night wore on, Rowan revealed fragments of himself. Not the billionaire, not the empire, but the man beneath. He spoke of trust, of betrayal, of people who had used him and left scars deeper than wealth could ever hide. And though Elena didn't realize it, each word was a test, each glance a calculation. Rowan wasn't only falling for her. He was weighing whether he could risk letting her into a world that had destroyed everyone else who dared to love him. But Elena wasn't the only one keeping secrets. That same night, as Rowan escorted her home, a black car trailed them at a distance. Inside sat the man from the restaurant, a phone pressed to his ear. "She's with him," the man whispered. "The girl. He's protecting her." "Good." A voice replied coldly on the other end. "Then she'll be the perfect weapon." Elena's life was about to change forever, and she had no idea that her heart was no longer just hers to protect. Elena could not shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of that man in the restaurant lingered like a shadow in her thoughts. She replayed the way Rowan's grip had tightened on her hand, the flicker of violence in his eyes, and the quiet urgency in his voice when he told her to trust him. Trust was not something Elena gave easily. Yet the more she resisted, the more she felt herself being drawn into his orbit. It was as though Rowan Blackwood had become a gravity she could no longer escape. The next morning, she tried to focus on her routine, but her thoughts kept straying. She brewed coffee, wiped down tables, greeted customers, but every chime of the door made her heart race. She told herself she didn't want him to come back, but deep down she knew she was lying. When the bell finally rang and his tall figure appeared in the doorway, her chest tightened in equal parts relief and dread. Rowan walked in with the confidence of a man who owned not just the cafe, but the world itself. Today, however, his eyes looked different. Tired, watchful, as though the weight of unseen battles pressed against him. Elena poured his coffee in silence, but when she set the cup down, his fingers brushed hers, an unspoken request for her attention. "Dinner again," he said, not asking but declaring. Elena lifted her chin. "You're not used to hearing no, are you?" His lips curved faintly, though his eyes stayed serious. "Not from you." For a moment, she wanted to smile, wanted to believe he was just a man chasing her because he wanted her and nothing more. But she couldn't forget the man who had been watching them, or the way Rowan had looked when he noticed him. Something was happening beneath the surface, something dangerous, and her instincts told her she was standing at the edge of it. That evening, against her better judgment, she found herself in his world again. He took her to a private art gallery, the kind reserved for the wealthiest elites. The walls were lined with priceless paintings, but Rowan hardly looked at them. His eyes stayed on her, drinking in every detail, as though she were the true masterpiece. "Why me?" Elena asked finally, unable to bear the silence. "You could be with anyone. Women throw themselves at you. Why keep coming back to me?" He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you see me," he said at last. "Not the money, not the name. Just me." The words struck her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, the gallery doors opened. A woman swept in, tall and elegant, her beauty sharp enough to cut glass. She walked straight toward them, her heels clicking like gunfire on the marble floor. "Rowan," she said smoothly, her voice laced with familiarity. "I didn't expect to find you here. With company." Elena felt a chill as the woman's eyes raked over her, dismissing her in an instant. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Victoria," he said curtly, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," she purred. "Father said you've been distracted lately. Now I see why." Her gaze flicked back to Elena, and though her smile didn't falter, there was venom beneath it. Elena's pulse quickened. She suddenly felt like an intruder in a world she didn't belong to, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She wanted to leave, but Rowan's hand slipped into hers, anchoring her. "Don't," he whispered so only she could hear. "Don't let her see you break." The evening ended in strained silence. Rowan escorted her home, his expression darker than she had ever seen. When they reached her door, she finally asked the question burning inside her. "Who was she?" He exhaled slowly, his eyes shadowed. "Victoria Blackwood. My cousin. But more importantly, she's the board's favorite. They want her to marry me, to merge our shares and secure the empire." Elena froze. "And what do you want?" His gaze met hers, intense and unwavering. Not her. The words should have comforted her, but instead they filled her with unease. Because if Victoria was part of his world, then she was not just a rival. She was a threat. The next days blurred together in a haze of emotions. Rowan's presence grew stronger in her life, yet so did the dangers that came with it. Elena noticed black cars parked too long near her street. She caught strangers watching her in the cafe. And then there were the whispers, customers murmuring about her, coworkers shooting jealous glances, as though her association with Rowan had painted a target on her back. One night, as she walked home, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her again. She quickened her pace, heart pounding. This time, it wasn't Rowan who stepped from the shadows. It was the man from the restaurant, his eyes gleaming coldly under the streetlight. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice calm but edged with menace. A word. Fear gripped her throat. "Who are you?" "Someone who wants to keep you safe," he replied, though the way he said it made her blood run cold. "Rowan Blackwood is dangerous. You think he cares about you, but you're just a piece in his game. Walk away before you regret it." Before she could respond, Rowan appeared, his expression thunderous. In one swift motion, he stepped between them, his presence radiating raw power. "Stay away from her," Rowan growled, his voice low and lethal. The man smirked, unfazed. "You can't protect everyone, Blackwood. Sooner or later, she'll pay the price for standing too close to you." With that, he melted into the shadows, leaving Elena trembling. Rowan turned to her, his eyes burning with anger and something else, fear. "You should have told me," he said sharply. "Told you what?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "That strangers are following me because of you? That I don't feel safe in my own life anymore? I didn't ask for any of this, Rowan." His expression softened at her words, the storm in his eyes dimming. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry, but it's too late now. You're already in this with me." Elena's heart twisted. She wanted to run, to escape before she was swallowed by a world of secrets and danger. Yet when she looked at him, she saw the man who had defended a homeless stranger, the man who spoke of betrayal with a pain that mirrored her own. Against all reason, her heart whispered that she could trust him, that maybe, just maybe, love could survive even in the shadows. But fate was not finished with her. That very night, as she tried to sleep, Her mother knocked on her door, her face pale with fear. "Elena," she whispered, clutching a torn envelope. This was slipped under the door. Elena took it, her hands trembling as she unfolded the note. The words were scrawled in bold, menacing letters. "Stay away from Rowan Blackwood, or you'll both burn." Her heart stopped. For the first time, she realized that whatever game Rowan was playing, she was no longer a bystander. She was the leverage, the bait, the weapon, and someone out there was willing to destroy her to get to him. Rowan Blackwood stood in the dim light of his penthouse office. The city stretched out beneath him in a sea of glittering lights. From this height, everything looked small, insignificant, easy to control. Yet for the first time in years, he felt powerless. The note slipped under Elena's door wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. He had built his empire on control, on anticipating every move of his enemies. But Elena's presence had changed the game. She was the one variable he hadn't accounted for, the one person who made him vulnerable. He poured a glass of scotch, but the burn in his throat did nothing to quiet the turmoil in his chest. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his head of security. "We traced the man. Marcus Hale, former Blackwood associate. Dangerous. Connected to Victoria." Rowan's jaw tightened. Victoria. Of course. His cousin had always been ambitious, but to use Elena as leverage? That was a line even he hadn't thought she would cross. He slammed the glass down, the crystal shattering against the floor. "Damn it, Victoria," he muttered. Meanwhile, Elena lay awake in her modest apartment, staring at the ceiling as the threat echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe Rowan could protect her, but the fear was growing heavier with each passing day. She thought of her mother, fragile and vulnerable, and wondered if her choices were endangering more than just herself. For years she had fought to keep their lives stable, to hold together the pieces of their fragile world. Now, one man with too much power had dragged her into chaos. The next morning, Rowan appeared at the cafe, not as the charming patron who always asked for coffee, but as a storm. He walked in with two men flanking him, his eyes sharp, his expression unyielding. Customers fell silent, sensing the shift in his demeanor. He walked straight to Elena, ignoring the whispers around them. "Come with me," he said firmly. Elena froze. "I'm working." "Not anymore." His voice left no room for argument. He took her hand, ignoring the shocked looks from her coworkers, and led her outside. "Rowan, you can't just." "I can and I will." He cut in, his voice low and urgent. "Your life is in danger, Elena. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it to me," she snapped, pulling her hand free. "Because all I see is a man dragging me into a world I never asked for. You talk about danger, but you don't tell me anything. Do you think I'm just going to follow blindly?" His chest rose and fell, his gray eyes clashing with hers. For a long moment, he said nothing, as though battling with himself. Then finally he spoke. "Your father," he said quietly. "The reason you're in this mess is because of your father." Elena blinked. "My father? He left when I was a child. I barely remember him. He was once tied to the Blackwood Empire," Rowan explained, his voice grim. "He worked for us, but he betrayed the family. He stole money, information, and disappeared. The enemies he made, they haven't forgotten. And now, because of me, they've found you." The world tilted beneath her. Her father, the man she'd spent years resenting for abandoning them, was the reason her life was unraveling. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rowan shook his head. "I wish I were." Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned away, her chest aching with betrayal, not just from her father, but from Rowan too. He had known this. He had been searching for her from the beginning, and she hadn't seen it. "You didn't come to that cafe by accident," she said bitterly. "You were looking for me." Rowan's silence was answer enough. Elena walked away, her heart pounding. She needed air, space, anything but the suffocating weight of his secrets. But as she rounded the corner, she saw a familiar black car parked at the curb. The window rolled down, and Marcus Hale's cold eyes met hers. "Going somewhere," he drawled. Fear froze her in place, but before he could step out, Rowan appeared, slamming Marcus back against the car with a force that shook the street. His men pulled their weapons, a tense standoff unfolding in broad daylight. "Stay away from her," Rowan snarled, his voice like thunder. Marcus only smirked. "You can't protect her forever. She's already marked. Everyone knows she's your weakness now." The words sliced through Rowan. Weakness. It was the one thing he could never afford to have. Yet as he glanced at Elena, pale and trembling, he realized Marcus was right. She was his weakness, and he would burn the world before letting anyone touch her. That night, Rowan brought Elena to his penthouse. She tried to protest, but he silenced her with a look. The walls of the Blackwood Tower loomed around her, glass and steel rising above the city like a fortress. Inside, everything was immaculate, luxurious, yet strangely cold, like Rowan himself. "This is insane," she muttered as he locked the door behind them. "You can't just trap me here." "I'm not trapping you," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm protecting you." She turned on him, anger and fear boiling together. "Protecting me from what? From your cousin? From men with guns? Or from you, Rowan? Because right now, I don't know who I should be more afraid of." Her words cut him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes burning with something raw and unguarded. "Be afraid of them. Never me." For the first time, Elena saw the cracks in his armor. The pain, the guilt, the loneliness he carried like chains. And despite everything, despite the lies and the danger, her heart betrayed her. She wanted to believe him. But outside the walls of the penthouse, enemies were already closing in. Victoria sat in her own lavish suite, a glass of wine in hand, her lips curved in a cold smile. "Let him think he's protecting her," she murmured to Marcus over the phone. "The deeper he falls, the easier it will be to destroy them both." Elena had no idea that her love was not just a risk. It was a weapon. And in the war for Rowan Blackwood's empire, she had just become the most dangerous piece on the board. Elena couldn't sleep. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet, its silence heavy with unspoken truths. She paced the length of the glass wall, staring at the skyline glittering like a sea of stars, her reflection staring back at her with haunted eyes. Everything had changed in just a few days. Her life, her sense of safety, even her heart. Rowan Blackwood had stepped into her world and shattered everything she thought she knew, leaving her torn between fear and a dangerous pull she couldn't resist. Behind her, Rowan stood in the doorway, watching. He hadn't told her everything yet, not even close. But each time he looked at her, he felt the weight of his choices pressing harder. He had sworn long ago that nothing and no one would ever compromise his control. Yet here she was, unraveling him piece by piece. "You should rest," he said quietly. Elena turned, her arms wrapped around herself. "How can I? Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. That man, Marcus, he was waiting for me. If you hadn't shown up." "You're safe here," Rowan interrupted, stepping into the room. "No one gets into this building without my knowledge." Her laugh was bitter. "Safe? In a glass tower where everyone knows who you are, what you have, and now, who you're protecting. They'll come, Rowan, and you can't lock me away forever." He closed the distance between them, his voice low but firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." Something flickered in her chest, a warmth that scared her more than any threat outside. She looked up at him, her breath catching as their eyes met. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter, only the gravity pulling them closer. His hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, as if he too feared what it meant. "Elena," he murmured, her name a confession on his lips. But before either could say more, Rowan's phone buzzed sharply, shattering the fragile moment. He cursed under his breath and answered. "Talk," he barked. On the other end, his head of security spoke quickly. "Boss, we've got movement. Marcus isn't working alone. We intercepted chatter. Victoria's planning something big. A hit, maybe tonight." Rowan's eyes darkened. "Double security. Lock down every entry point. If she wants a war, she'll get one." He ended the call, his jaw set. Elena's heart raced. "Victoria? Your cousin?" He nodded. "She's been circling for years, waiting for a weakness. Now she thinks she's found it. Me, Elena whispered. Yes, Rowan admitted. His honesty was brutal, but it was the truth she needed. She'll use you against me because she knows what I can't admit, that you matter. Elena's breath caught. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She should have been terrified, but the raw vulnerability in his words melted something deep inside her. For the first time, she saw not the ruthless billionaire alpha, but the man beneath, the one who had carried too much for too long. Then what happens now? She asked softly. Rowan's gaze held hers, unflinching. Now I fight. The hours that followed blurred into chaos. Security men moved like shadows throughout the penthouse, weapons concealed, communication lines open. Rowan barked orders with cold precision, his every movement radiating authority. Elena watched from the edge, her hands trembling, torn between fear and the strange, reckless trust growing inside her. As night fell, tension thickened in the air. Elena sat curled on the couch, staring at the door as if it might burst open at any moment. Rowan joined her, his presence steady, grounding. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You're not the reason, he said firmly. Victoria has been after me for years. You're just the excuse she's been waiting for. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. And if she wins? She won't, Rowan said with iron certainty. Because I don't lose. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat before emergency generators hummed to life. Elena's pulse spiked. Rowan was already on his feet, his instincts razor-sharp. They're here, he muttered. Gunfire erupted in the distance, muffled but unmistakable. Rowan pulled Elena to her feet, his grip firm. Stay close. The penthouse transformed into a battlefield. Shadows moved through the halls, security clashed with intruders, and the sound of violence echoed through the tower. Rowan led Elena through a hidden passage behind the study, his movements swift and calculated. This way, he urged, guiding her down a narrow stairwell that spiraled deep into the building. But as they reached the lower level, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Victoria, dressed in sleek black, her beauty was sharpened by cruelty, her smile cold and victorious. Cousin, she purred, you always did have a weakness for strays. Her gaze slid to Elena, dripping with disdain. She's not even worth it, Rowan. And yet here you are, ready to burn your empire for her. Rowan's body tensed, placing himself between Elena and Victoria. This isn't about her. It's about you and your greed. Victoria's laugh was sharp. Greed? No, Rowan. This is about justice. You've held the throne long enough. It's my turn. With a snap of her fingers, armed men emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Elena's breath caught, panic clawing at her chest. She clung to Rowan's arm, her eyes wide with terror. But Rowan didn't flinch. His presence filled the space, his voice like steel. If you want to take me down, Victoria, you'll have to go through me. And I promise you, you won't survive it. The standoff stretched, thick with danger. Elena's heart pounded so loudly, she thought it might shatter her ribs. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet wouldn't move. All she could do was trust Rowan, the man who had walked into her life and turned it upside down, the man who now stood between her and death itself. And in that moment, as enemies closed in and the future hung by a thread, Elena realized something with terrifying clarity. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of losing him. The air in the narrow stairwell felt charged, heavy with danger. Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly as she clung to Rowan's arm, surrounded by Victoria's armed men. Every second stretched like an eternity, the tension wound so tight it threatened to snap. Rowan's silver eyes glinted in the dim emergency light, cold and unyielding, the predator in him fully awake. Drop your weapons, Victoria commanded, her voice smooth as silk, laced with malice. Do it now, Rowan, or your little pet here learns just how disposable she is. Rowan didn't move. He was a statue of power, his broad frame shielding Elena entirely. His jaw clenched, his muscles coiled with lethal energy. You think threatening her will break me? His voice was low, dangerous. It only makes me angrier. Victoria's smirk widened. Anger makes you reckless. That's why you'll lose tonight. She gestured, and one of her men stepped forward, gun raised. Elena's scream caught at her throat, but before the shot could fire, Rowan moved. It was like watching lightning strike. In a blur, he yanked Elena behind him, lunged at the gunman, and disarmed him with brutal precision. A sickening crack echoed as the man crumpled to the ground, weapon now in Rowan's hand. Anyone else? Rowan growled, his voice reverberating through the corridor like thunder. For a moment, the men hesitated. The sheer force of his presence unsettled them. But Victoria's eyes burned with venom. "Kill him," she snapped. Chaos exploded. Gunfire roared in the confined space, bullets ricocheting off steel and concrete. Rowan fired back with deadly accuracy, dropping 2 men in quick succession. He shoved Elena against the wall, covering her with his body as sparks flew from the impact of rounds hitting metal. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, on the man fighting with a ferocity that was both terrifying and breathtaking. "Elena, run," he barked. "I'm not leaving you," she cried, her voice breaking. His eyes met hers for a split second, raw and desperate. "Please, go." But before she could move, one of Victoria's men lunged at her, grabbing her wrist. Elena screamed, struggling against his grip, but he was too strong. Rowan turned, his fury unleashed. He shot the man in the shoulder, forcing him to release her, then crushed him against the wall with brutal force. Blood smeared the concrete as the man slumped, unconscious. Victoria clapped slowly, her laughter sharp and mocking. "Impressive, truly, but you can't protect her forever, cousin. And when she's gone, you'll finally understand what it means to lose everything." Rowan raised his gun, aiming directly at her. His voice was a snarl. "Try me." For the first time, Victoria's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, signaling her men to retreat. "This isn't over. Tonight was just a message. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Her words lingered like poison as she disappeared into the shadows, her remaining men dragging the wounded with them. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the copper tang of blood. Rowan lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. He turned to Elena, his eyes scanning her frantically for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her body trembled uncontrollably. "And no, just shaken." Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic hammer of his heart. "I swear, Elena," he whispered in her hair, his voice raw, "no one will ever touch you again. Not while I'm breathing." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming swell of emotions she couldn't contain. "Why are you doing this for me?" she choked out. "I'm nothing compared to everything you have. Why risk it all?" Rowan pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. The truth hovered on his lips, heavy, undeniable. "Because you're not nothing. You're the only thing that matters anymore." The world seemed still. Elena's breath caught, her heart lurching at the raw vulnerability in his confession. Before she could respond, he lowered his head, capturing her lips with his. The kiss was fierce, desperate, a collision of fear, passion, and longing. She clung to him, melting into the fire of his embrace, her doubts dissolving under the intensity of his touch. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Elena's tears had turned into something else entirely. Hope, fragile but real. "What happens now?" she whispered. Rowan's expression hardened, though his thumb brushed tenderly across her cheek. "Now we prepare. Victoria won't stop until one of us is gone, and I won't let it be you." The following days were a blur of strategy and secrecy. Rowan's empire bristled with security measures, his trusted allies brought in from across the globe. Elena watched as the fortress around them grew tighter, yet she also saw the cracks beneath Rowan's armor. The sleepless nights, the tension in his shoulders, the weight of responsibility threatening to crush him. One evening, as he sat in his office, papers and maps strewn across the desk. Elena approached quietly. She placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You can't fight this battle alone," she said softly. He looked up at her, exhaustion etched into his features. "It's my war, Elena. You didn't choose this." "But I chose to stay," she replied firmly. "And if I'm part of the target, then I'll be part of the fight." Something shifted in his eyes then, a flicker of admiration mingling with fear. He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're braver than you know." That night, Rowan opened up more than he ever had before. He told her about the Blackwood legacy, the power struggles, the betrayals that had carved scars into his soul. He confessed his loneliness, the emptiness of a life built on control and fear. And Elena listened, not as a captive audience, but as someone who truly saw him, the man behind the empire, the man who had built walls so high even he couldn't climb them. When he finished, she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. For the first time in years, Rowan believed it. But peace was fleeting. Late into the night, a coded message arrived, a taunt from Victoria, laced with coordinates and a chilling promise. Rowan's hands clenched around the paper, his jaw tight. "She wants me to come to her," he said darkly. "A trap, no doubt." Elena's pulse quickened. "Then don't go." "I have to," Rowan replied, his voice resolute. "If I don't face her, she'll keep coming after you. After us." The word hung between them, unspoken yet undeniable. Us. Elena's heart twisted with fear, but also with fierce determination. "Then I'm going with you." Rowan's eyes widened, his instinct screaming to refuse. But the fire in her gaze silenced him. She wasn't the fragile woman he'd first met. She was steel wrapped in softness, stronger than even she knew. And deep down, he realized he needed her as much as she needed him. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Then we go together." The decision sealed their fate. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the city in hues of gold, Rowan and Elena stood side by side, united not just by circumstance, but by something deeper, something dangerous, something unbreakable. And in the shadows, Victoria watched from afar, her smile sharp as a blade. The game was only just beginning. The dawn of the confrontation came cloaked in a silence that felt heavier than any storm. Elena stood at the window of Rowan's penthouse, watching the city stretch awake beneath the rising sun. The streets looked ordinary, people moving with their usual haste, unaware that above them, lives were being gambled like pieces in a dangerous game. Her reflection in the glass betrayed the truth, eyes shadowed by fear, lips pressed tight, but a flicker of determination burning in her chest. Rowan appeared behind her, already dressed in black. His fitted shirt and tailored jacket framed him like a warrior preparing for battle, every line of his body radiating control. Yet beneath the sharp exterior, Elena saw the man who hadn't slept, the one who carried the weight of an empire and the fragility of a heart he was only beginning to acknowledge. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. "If something happens—" "Stop," Elena interrupted, turning to face him. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "If you walk into this alone, you'll lose more than your throne. You'll lose yourself, and I won't let that happen." For a heartbeat, Rowan simply looked at her. Then slowly he nodded. "Then we walk in together." By the time the sun fully rose, Rowan's private jet was waiting on the tarmac. The coordinates Victoria had sent pointed to a remote estate on the outskirts of the city, a place Rowan knew all too well. It had once belonged to his uncle, a man who had raised him with a twisted mix of love and cruelty before Rowan had seized his own path. That Victoria had chosen it wasn't an accident. It was a reminder of where Rowan had come from and what he had fought to escape. As the jet cut through the sky, Elena sat beside Rowan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He reached over, covering her fingers with his own, the warmth of his touch steadying her. "No matter what happens, remember this," he said, his voice low, almost tender. "You're the only thing that matters to me now. Everything else, it's just noise." Her chest tightened, tears threatening. She nodded, gripping his hand as though it were the only anchor she had. The estate loomed like a ghost from another life. Gray stone walls rose against the horizon, its once grand halls now swallowed by shadows and ivy. Armed men were stationed at the gates, their presence a stark reminder that this was no reunion. It was a battlefield. Rowan stepped out first, his presence commanding, eyes scanning every angle with lethal precision. Elena followed, her heart hammering but her chin lifted. She would not let Victoria see her break. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. The grand hall stretched before them, its marble floors cracked, its chandeliers coated in cobwebs. And at the far end, seated as though on a throne, was Victoria. She rose gracefully, her black dress clinging like liquid darkness, her smile ablaze. "Welcome, cousin. And you brought the little distraction with you. How sweet." Rowan's voice was a growl. "Cut the games, Victoria. You want the Empire, don't you? Then face me. Leave her out of this." Victoria laughed, the sound echoing off the decayed walls. "Oh, Rowan, always the noble one. But don't you see? She's the Empire now. She's your weakness. And weakness has no place on the throne." With a snap of her fingers, armed men spilled from the shadows, surrounding them. Elena's breath caught, but Rowan remained unmoved, his stance like stone. "You underestimate me," he said coldly. "And you overestimate yourself." Victoria's smile sharpened. "We'll see." The standoff ignited like fire to tinder. Guns were drawn, voices shouted, the hall erupting in chaos. Rowan shoved Elena behind a marble column, shielding her as bullets shattered the air. His men, who had infiltrated quietly with him, countered Victoria's forces with ruthless precision. The grand hall became a storm of violence, echoes of war bouncing off its broken grandeur. Elena pressed against the cold stone, her heart racing, her every instinct screaming to stay hidden. But as she peeked around the column, her blood turned to ice. Victoria was no longer standing idly. She was moving, weaving through the chaos with predatory grace, her eyes fixed on Elena. Before Elena could cry out, Victoria was there, her hand fisting in Elena's hair, yanking her back with brutal force. Elena gasped, pain shooting through her scalp as Victoria pressed a knife against her throat. "Rowan!" Victoria's voice rang sharp above the chaos. "Call off your men, or she dies here and now." Time seemed to stop. Rowan's head snapped toward them, his silver eyes burning with a fury that could consume the world. His gun was steady in his hand, aimed directly at Victoria, but his body trembled with the restraint of a man torn between war and love. "Let her go," he demanded, his voice dark with command. Victoria pressed the blade harder against Elena's skin, drawing a thin line of blood. Elena whimpered, her tears blurring her vision, but she refused to beg. "You can't save her and keep your empire," Victoria taunted. "Choose, Rowan, the throne or her life." The hall fell silent, both sides frozen in the gravity of the choice. Rowan's men stood still, awaiting his command. Elena's breath came in shallow gasps, fear clawing at her chest. And then Rowan spoke, his voice steady, absolute. "There is no choice. She is my empire." With deadly precision, he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, slicing the silence like thunder. Victoria's eyes widened as the bullet struck her arm, forcing her to drop the knife. Elena stumbled free, collapsing into Rowan's arms as he pulled her behind him. Victoria's scream echoed through the hall, her fury unbridled. She clutched her bleeding arm, her face twisted with hatred. "You'll regret this, Rowan. You'll regret ever thinking you could defy me." But Rowan was already moving, shielding Elena as his men surged forward, overwhelming the last of Victoria's forces. The hall shook with the violence of the battle until, at last, silence fell once more. Rowan turned to Elena, his hands cupping her face, his eyes wild with fear and relief. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. You chose me." He pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering through his chest. "I'll always choose you," he whispered fiercely. No crown, no fortune, no throne will ever matter more than you. And as the dust settled around them, as Victoria's retreating footsteps faded into the shadows, Elena knew the war was far from over. But in Rowan's arms, for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt unbreakable. The storm outside matched the chaos within Elena's heart. She sat in her apartment, still trembling from the argument with Alexander. His words echoed in her mind, sharp and unrelenting, tearing through her already fragile resolve. She had never seen him so cold, so unreachable. Yet beneath his anger she had caught a flicker of something. Pain, perhaps even fear. But before she could reach for him, he had turned his back, leaving her stranded between truth and accusation. She pressed her hands against her face, feeling the sting of hot tears. She had thought she could protect him by hiding parts of her past, by keeping the skeletons buried deep where they could never claw their way back to the surface. But Alexander's world was a place where secrets were dragged into the light, dissected, and used as weapons. And now her silence had turned into betrayal in his eyes. Her phone buzzed on the table. With shaky fingers, she reached for it. A message appeared, one that chilled her blood. "I warned you. Walk away before it's too late. He'll destroy you when he learns the truth." The number was hidden, unknown, but the venom was clear. Someone was watching her. Someone who wanted her gone from Alexander's life. She dropped the phone as though it burned her, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Who could be? A rival from Alexander's cutthroat business empire? Someone from her own past? Or perhaps one of the women who hovered around him, desperate to claim his fortune and name? The questions circled like vultures, refusing to let her breathe. Meanwhile, Alexander sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched at his side. He stared at the flickering city lights beyond the window, his jaw locked tight. He had built his empire on control, on never letting emotions dictate his decisions. Yet here he was, undone by one woman who had slipped past every wall he had erected. He wanted to believe Elena, wanted to trust the softness in her voice and the sincerity in her eyes. But the shadows of lies wrapped too tightly around her, and he could not afford weakness. Not now, not ever. His assistant, a man who had been with him for years, entered quietly with a file. "Sir, there's something you should see." Alexander took the folder, flipping it open. Inside were photographs. Elena meeting a man in a dimly lit cafe, her expression tense, her eyes darting around nervously. The man was unfamiliar, his face partly hidden by a cap, but the implication was clear. To anyone looking at the images, it appeared secretive, perhaps even incriminating. A cold fury surged through Alexander. Betrayal. Again. Was he nothing more than a fool blinded by her beauty? He slammed the folder shut, his silver eyes burning with resolve. If Elena was playing him, he would uncover the truth with his own hands. And if she wasn't, then he would destroy whoever dared set her up. The following day, Elena tried to reach Alexander, but every call went unanswered. When she went to his mansion, the gates remained closed. She felt the walls closing in, her desperation mounting. But before she could retreat, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. Victor, Alexander's ruthless business rival. "Miss Elena," he said smoothly, his lips curving into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I think we need to talk." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but his next words froze her in place. "I know who's been sending you those messages. And I know the truth about Alexander's family. The truth he would rather you never discover." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, though her voice trembled. Victor chuckled softly. "Step into the car, and I'll tell you everything." Against her better judgment, Elena slid into the leather seat. The door shut behind her with a thud that felt final, like the sealing of fate. Victor's cologne was sharp, suffocating, and his gaze studied her like a predator savoring his prey. "You see, Alexander's fortune isn't as clean as he wants the world to believe," Victor said, his voice low and deliberate. "His empire was built on shadows, on betrayals, blood, and secrets buried so deep even he pretends they don't exist. But you, Elena, you've already seen the cracks. Haven't you? Her breath caught. She thought back to the mysterious disappearances of files in his office, the hushed arguments on late-night calls, the guarded looks whenever family was mentioned. There'd always been something unspoken, lurking beneath his polished exterior. Victor leaned closer, his smile widening. Stay with him, and you'll drown in those secrets. Walk away now, and I'll protect you. I'll make sure your past doesn't come back to ruin you. But if you stay, he trailed off, his meaning heavy in the silence. Elena's chest heaved with confusion. Why was Victor, of all people, offering protection? And why did his words feel both like a warning and a trap? That night, Alexander received another folder, this time anonymously delivered to his mansion. Inside was a single photograph, Elena stepping into Victor's car. His blood ran cold, a lethal mix of anger and heartbreak ripping through him. Whatever game Elena was playing, it was destroying him from the inside out. But deep down, beneath the fury and mistrust, a voice whispered a different truth, that he still loved her, that he needed her in ways he could not articulate. Yet love without trust was a blade, and he was already bleeding. As the city slept, fate wound its threads tighter around them both. Pulling them into a storm, neither could escape. Lies tangled with love, betrayal shadowed desire, and the cost of truth grew higher with every heartbeat. The battle between heart and fortune had only just begun, and one wrong choice could shatter them forever. The city glowed under the weight of a restless night, but Alexander felt no comfort in its brilliance. He sat in his car outside Victor's building, the photo of Elena stepping into his rival's car burning in his pocket. His mind was a storm, betrayal, anger, and a gnawing fear he couldn't silence. Why would she go to Victor, of all people? Was it desperation? Or had she been working against him all along? Inside, Elena sat across from Victor in his penthouse, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had demanded answers, and now he dangled them like bait before her. You want to know the truth? Victor said, pouring himself a glass of wine, his smirk infuriatingly calm. Alexander's father built that fortune by crushing every man who stood in his way. Bankruptcies ruined families, silent partners who were never heard from again. The Blackwood name isn't one of honor. It's a dynasty of destruction. Elena's lips parted, her chest tightening. You're lying. You're twisting everything because you hate him. Victor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Am I? Or has Alexander never spoken to you about the man who disappeared after refusing to sell his company to the Blackwoods? Or the scandal buried after his uncle mysteriously vanished, leaving Alexander's father in control of everything? Secrets always find their way out, Elena. And when Alexander realizes you know the truth, do you think he'll forgive you for being the weak link? Her hands trembled. The weight of his words pressed down on her, but something inside her rebelled. She had seen Alexander's heart, his raw pain, his vulnerability when the walls fell away. He was not his father. He was not the empire that bore his name. Victor studied her closely, then chuckled. You really do love him. That's the tragedy, isn't it? But love will destroy you both. Walk away now, and I'll bury your past so deep no one will ever find it. Before Elena could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. The door flung open, and Alexander stormed in, his silver eyes blazing with fury. Elena. His voice was a whip, sharp and cutting. So this is where you've been. She shot to her feet, her face pale. Alexander, it's not what you think. Not what I think. He slammed the photograph onto the table, the image of her stepping into Victor's car staring back at her. How many lies do you expect me to swallow before I choke on them? Victor smirked, lifting his glass. I told you she couldn't be trusted. Alexander's fist clenched, his fury nearly boiling over. Stay out of this, Victor. This is between her and me. Elena's voice cracked, tears burning her eyes. I only came here because he said he knew who was threatening me, who's been sending those messages. I didn't betray you, Alexander. I was trying to protect us. Her words hung in the air, fragile yet desperate. For a moment, Alexander faltered, doubt flickering through his anger. But Victor seized the opening, his tone silky and poisonous. She's feeding you what you want to hear. Just like her family fed you lies before you ruined them too. You think she's with you for love? No, Alexander. She's after the same thing every woman is after, your fortune. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena staggered back as if struck, her breath shattering in her chest. The one man she had loved, defended, and risked everything for now stood before her with mistrust darkening his gaze. Her voice shook as she whispered, "If you believe him, if you truly think I came into your life for money, then you don't know me at all." Alexander's jaw tightened, torn between the woman he loved and the venom Victor dripped so easily. His heart screamed to believe her, but his mind, hardened by years of betrayal and power games, could not let go of suspicion. Elena turned, her steps unsteady as she moved toward the door. She paused only once, her eyes glistening with anguish. "I loved you, Alexander, with everything I had. But maybe love isn't enough for a man who can't trust." She left, the door slamming behind her, leaving Alexander in the wreckage of his own doubts. Victor smirked triumphantly, sipping his wine, but Alexander barely saw him. His chest ached with a pain that no victory, no empire could ease. Later that night, alone in his mansion, Alexander stared at the city skyline, haunted by the echo of Elena's words. Love wasn't enough. Not when his fear of betrayal had already driven her away. He pressed his hands to his face, realizing too late that he had pushed the only woman who had ever truly seen him out of his life. But fate wasn't done with him yet. As Elena packed her things in her small apartment, another message lit up her phone. "You think walking away will save you? It's only just begun." Her heart dropped, the weight of danger pressing down harder than ever. And in that moment, she knew the truth. Whether Alexander trusted her or not, they were both caught in a storm far greater than themselves. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady hum of the city beyond Elena's window. She sat on her bed, a suitcase half-packed at her feet, her phone clutched in trembling hands. The latest message burned into her mind like fire. It's only just begun. Whoever was tormenting her wasn't going to stop. Not if she stayed. Not if she left. The threat was woven too tightly around her life and Alexander's. Her resolve hardened. She couldn't keep running. She had to face whoever was behind this, even if it meant standing alone. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his study, shadows stretching long across the floor. He hadn't slept. Elena's absence carved a hollow ache inside him, one that no amount of power or wealth could fill. He had built empires, crushed rivals, and outlasted storms, but he had never felt so powerless. For the first time, he realized that love, not fortune, was the one thing he could not command into obedience. The buzz of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. A message. His eyes narrowed as he read it. "Meet me at the old pier at midnight. Come alone, or she pays the price." Attached was a photo. Elena, taken through her apartment window, unaware she was being watched. His blood turned to ice. Whoever was orchestrating this had crossed a line. Fury surged through him, no longer clouded by suspicion, but sharpened by clarity. If Elena was in danger, there was no time left for doubt. Midnight cloaked the old pier in shadows, the water restless under the glow of the moon. Alexander arrived first, his footsteps echoing against the wooden planks. His silver eyes scanned the darkness, alert, ready for anything. Then he saw her, Elena, standing near the edge, her expression tense, fear and defiance battling in her eyes. "Elena." His voice was rough, almost breaking. He took a step forward. Before she could answer, another figure emerged from the shadows, Victor. His smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. A gun gleamed in his hand. "You never learn, do you, Alexander?" Victor sneered. "You take everything. Every deal, every opportunity, every victory. Did you really think I let you keep her too?" Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as she realized the truth. It had been Victor all along. The threats, the photographs, The poison whispered between her and Alexander. He had orchestrated everything, weaving lies until trust collapsed between them. "You've been playing us," she whispered, fury rising in her chest. Victor's smile curved cruelly. "And it worked. I made him doubt you. I made you doubt him. All it took was a few whispers, a few shadows, and you were ready to walk away. That's the thing about love. It's fragile. Break trust, and it shatters." Alexander's fist clenched, his voice low and lethal. "You'll regret this, Victor." Victor raised the gun, aiming it directly at Elena. "I don't think I will. The Blackwood Empire ends tonight. Not with you, Alexander, but with her. Let's see how you thrive without the one thing that makes you weak." Time slowed. Alexander lunged forward just as the gun went off. The shot cracked through the night, echoing across the water. Elena screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. But when the smoke cleared, it wasn't her who had fallen. It was Victor, the gun clattering to the pier as he collapsed. Behind him stood Alexander's loyal assistant, a weapon still smoking in his hand. His voice was steady. "I couldn't let him take you both down." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Alexander turned, his gaze locking onto Elena. His chest rose and fell heavily, his eyes raw with emotion. "I almost lost you," he said hoarsely. "Not because of him, but because of me, my doubt, my pride. I let him use my fear against us." Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she stepped closer, and I almost walked away because I thought love wasn't enough. But it is, Alexander. It always was. We just forgot to fight for it. He reached for her, his hand trembling as it cupped her face. "I don't care about fortune. I don't care about empire. None of it means anything without you. You are my heart, Elena. My everything." Her tears broke into a smile as she leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss that was fierce, desperate, and healing all at once. Around them, the night still carried the scars of betrayal and danger, but in that moment, love stood victorious. Days later, the scandal of Victor's downfall swept through the business world, but Alexander didn't care. He withdrew from the endless wars of power, placing Elena at the center of his world. The mansion no longer felt cold with her laughter echoing through its halls, no longer empty with her hand entwined in his. For Elena, the shadows of her past no longer haunted her. With Alexander by her side, she had found not just protection, but a love that had weathered storms and survived the fire of betrayal. Together, they had proven that trust, though fragile, could be rebuilt, and that love, when fought for, was stronger than any fortune. And so, their story, scarred but unbroken, ended not in loss, but in triumph. For in the end, his fortune had never been his empire. It had always been her heart.